During the early 90s, when I was 8 years old, I begged my parents to let me stay home alone instead of going to after-school care. Both of them worked late at their business, and I hated the daycare program, the stale crackers, and the cartoon tapes, and the older kid who'd hog the ping-pong table like it was his job. They finally agreed my first time alone would be on parent-teacher conference day, which meant school ended at noon. We spent several evenings going over rules. Don't open the door for anyone. Call mom's office immediately when I got home. Memorize police and fire department numbers. Stay off the back porch steps because the third one wobbled. I practiced the scenarios while Dad quizzed me at the kitchen table until I could recite everything perfectly. I was so excited to prove I could handle it, like this was the first real grown-up thing I'd get to do without a babysitter hovering. The day finally came and I rode the school bus home by myself, sitting on the aisle so I could bolt the second the doors hissed open. The bus dropped me off around 1 p.m. Our street was empty, everyone still at work, yards quiet, just a couple of mailboxes cracked open and one trash can on its side. I liked that it was bright, like training wheels. I unlocked the front door with the key on my shoelace lanyard and stepped inside. Immediately something felt wrong. Usually the house smelled like morning coffee and mom's perfume, but now it smelled like cigarette smoke, stale and cheap. Nobody in our family smoked. I set my backpack by the shoe mat, and the zipper scraped loud in the quiet. I walked into the living room and stopped. The TV was on, snowy and buzzing low, but we definitely turned it off that morning. On the coffee table sat a dirty mug with a brown ring and an ash floating in it that hadn't been there before. My heart kicked, but I told myself maybe Dad had come home for lunch, even though he never did, 'cause his office was across town. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand our layout, 'cause it matters. The front door opened to a short hallway with the staircase on the right, and a beige wall phone straight ahead, the kind with the long curly cord and a notepad dangling from a string. From that spot, you could see the second floor landing, just a strip of carpet and 3 doorways. The kitchen was left of the stairs with the back door and the sticky deadbolt, and the living room was right, TV against the far wall. Mrs. Collins, our across-the-street neighbor, was retired and home most afternoons with her dachshund, and our plan, if anything felt off, was to go there. I kept remembering that as I stared at the mug and the TV and tried to make them make sense. I picked up the phone like I'd promised and dialed Mom's office by heart. While the second number clicked, I glanced up the stairs and saw movement. A shadow sliding across the landing like someone had just crossed from my parents' room to the bathroom. The air left my throat. Mom answered on the third ring with her office voice. "This is Marianne." And I asked, trying to sound normal, if she'd been home watching TV that morning. She said no. Why was I asking? I told her the TV was on, and the house smelled like smoke, and I thought I heard Dad upstairs. Her voice changed completely. She said Dad wasn't home. He was at a client meeting across town. She told me to hang up right now and run to Mrs. Collins's house across the street. That's when I understood. Someone else was in our house with me. I didn't slam the receiver down 'cause the click might carry, so I eased it back onto the cradle with my hand shaking. Then I kept my fingers resting there so it wouldn't rattle. My mouth felt dry like chalk. I listened for footsteps. All I heard was the low hiss of the living room TV and the tiny hum from the fridge. Then a floorboard groaned from upstairs, the one outside the linen closet that always complained, and I almost dropped the handset anyway. Mom had said run. Front door was 3 steps behind me. I turned the deadbolt and it scraped louder than it ever had in my life. I stopped myself from looking back up the stairs because I knew if I saw a person I'd freeze. I remembered Dad's other rule, the one he said was the most important. Don't try to be a hero. Get to a safe adult. The coat closet by my knee had his aluminum bat leaning in it, but I didn't touch it. If the knob jiggled wrong and the door squealed, that would be it. I put my hand on the front doorknob and felt the cold metal, tried to turn it slow. The latch clicked anyway. I opened a slit, and a thin stripe of daylight slid across the hall carpet. Outside, the street sat empty. No cars passing. Only Baxter's bark from somewhere inside Mrs. Collins's house. I pictured the exact path. Down the 2 concrete steps, across the short patch of grass, cut diagonally to avoid the crack in the sidewalk that caught my toe sometimes, then straight to her door. I slid my sneaker heel against the mat to feel the lace loop. Double knotted, thank God. Another sound from upstairs, softer this time, like a door easing shut. I pulled the door wider, my shoulder against it so it wouldn't bounce. I didn't breathe. In that half-open slice, I could see the sun on the asphalt and the little oil spot that marked where Dad parked. I thought about grabbing my backpack for the emergency number sheet we'd made, then remembered they were also on Mrs. Collins's fridge and in my head. I stepped 1 foot onto the top step and the porch wood popped. I froze. The TV clicked, a channel change or a bump from the stand, I couldn't tell. I counted to 3 because Dad said if you count, your legs will move when you say go. I said go in my head. I stepped out and pulled the door with me so it wouldn't bang and give away the plan. The brass chain caught the jam for a second because it had fallen forward when I opened up and made this tiny ting that sounded like a bell. I slid it back with a finger. I didn't look back inside. I kept my face toward Mrs. Collins's porch with the faded wreath and the ceramic goose statue that always freaked me out at night. My foot hit the 2nd step. I braced to run. That's when I understood. Someone else was in our house with me. I looked toward the stairs and saw a man in a dark jacket coming down, a backpack slung over his shoulder. We made eye contact, and he froze halfway with his hand on the rail, like he had to do the math on me being there at all. For 1 second, we just stared. Then everything moved at once. I dropped the phone. Yeah, the wall handset just slipped and slammed against the base and the spiral cord kicked. And I bolted for the front door, which I'd forgotten to lock behind me because I'd been trying to be quiet more than careful. I yanked it open, almost tripping on the top step, and I ran. I cut straight across the lawn toward Mrs. Collins' porch. I looked back once against every rule I'd been given, and the man had come outside after me, pushing the door wide with his shoulder and scanning the yard, and then he suddenly turned and ran the opposite direction, disappearing around the side of our house, the backpack bouncing against his back like it was heavy. I didn't wait to see where. I just hit the neighbor's steps hard enough to bang my knee, and I started pounding on the door with the flat of my hand. Baxter barked like crazy and scratched at the other side, and I kept yelling, it's me, please," until the deadbolt slid, and Mrs. Collins appeared with wide eyes and her glasses crooked. She pulled me inside and locked the door again, chain and all, and told me to sit on the little bench by her phone table. She said, "Where are your parents?" And I said, "At work." And she said, "Don't move." She dialed 911 with this calm voice I didn't know she had, giving our address and saying there was an intruder at the house across the street, and a child, me, was safe with her now. She handed me the receiver so I could tell the dispatcher my name and that I'd seen him. And I tried to describe the jacket, dark, maybe navy, not new, and his hair was short, and he had this straight mouth, but my words kept tripping and the dispatcher kept me talking anyway, asking if he had a weapon, and I said I didn't see one, which was true. We stood by the side window and watched our yard without moving the curtain, just the tiniest edge lifted with one finger because Mrs. Collins said not to silhouette ourselves. The back gate creaked from somewhere behind the garage, which meant he'd gone out the alley. She whispered, "Stay down," and I crouched until my thighs shook. Sirens came fast, faster than I expected, and 2 patrol cars rolled up quiet with the lights only, no wail, and officers got out low and moved toward our porch, and then split around the sides. One of them waved Mrs. Collins to stay inside, and she nodded like a soldier. A few minutes later, felt longer, an officer knocked and identified himself and took us to her front walk so I could point where I'd seen him and where he ran. He asked me simple questions. How many? What direction? Did he say anything? And I shook my head at that last one because the guy hadn't said a word, not even when we locked eyes. They cleared our house room by room, and then one of them called out, "All clear," and another officer, older, came over with a little notebook and crouched to my height and said, "You did the right thing. You got out." That's the whole game. Mom pulled up before Dad did, both of them earlier than they should have been, and there was this brief crush of bodies at Mrs. Collins's door, Baxter barking, the police radio crackling, my mom's hand on the back of my head, and my dad saying my name 2, 3 times. And then we crossed to our house together when they said it was okay, careful where we stepped. Inside, they found my dad's laptop missing, bag gone from under the desk like it had never lived there, jewelry from my parents' bedroom dumped and picked through, boxes open and the good stuff not in them, and several prescription bottles taken from the bathroom cabinet, the door left swinging. The dirty mug and the ash were still on the coffee table like a joke. The burglars were never caught. Police told my parents I'd arrived home right in the middle of the break-in, and that the men probably watched the house during the day and knew the usual schedule and didn't expect anyone home at 1 p.m. It made sense. Our street was predictable. They said my voice and the phone and the TV noise might have spooked him into leaving fast, and that's why he cut out the side yard instead of chasing me. And honestly, if I'd been quieter, if I hadn't called out thinking my dad was there, maybe they would have finished and left without me knowing. Or maybe they would have heard me anyway and things would have turned out much worse. There's no clean version of it. And my parents didn't let me stay home alone again until I was 13. And that was fine with me, because for years afterward, I'd get anxious coming home to an empty house. And I still do sometimes. I still pause in the doorway in my 30s and scan the living room fast and check the top of the stairs and listen for anything that doesn't belong. I've been volunteering at our local animal shelter for the past 5 years, so I decided to organize a charity auction with donated items from neighbors. Put the announcement on our neighborhood forum, start time 10 a.m. Saturday at the community center. Specifically asked people not to come early since volunteers needed time to set up lots and register people. Morning of the auction, around 8:30, this woman, maybe 50 years old, shows up at my house with this entitled look on her face. She announced she was there for the auction and wanted to preview the lots before it started. I told her, as politely as I could, that the event hadn't begun and it was at the community center, not here. She frowned like I'd personally offended her, muttered something under her breath, and walked back toward a gray minivan parked down the street. I watched her pull a slow U-turn and creep past my driveway like she was reading the numbers on the curb, which, okay, maybe I was being paranoid, but it stuck with me. Should have been my first warning sign. I politely explained the event hadn't begun yet and was happening at the community center, not my home. She frowned, muttered something annoyed, and walked toward a gray minivan parked down the street. I watched her sit there for a second. Then she pulled a slow U-turn and rolled past my driveway like she was double-checking the numbers on the curb. Maybe I was reading into it, but it felt weird. I locked my door, grabbed the bid sheets, and headed out because people were counting on me. But that should have been my first warning sign from that morning anyway. Auction started on time and went well. About 40 people showed up. Lots of active bidding. We had a long folding table for check-in, numbered bid cards, a cheap PA that crackled but worked. Around noon, I spotted that same woman among the participants, now all smiles like the morning never happened. She kept outbidding others on antique items, aggressive about it, At one point, she approached me asking if there were valuable pieces not on display. I told her everything donated was already out. She insisted, hinting she'd pay premium for something worthwhile and couldn't she check storage room. I patiently explained there was no storage room. This was a charity auction, not an antique shop. She stared like I was lying, asked again, and I repeated it. She made a face, said she'd been told there were better pieces, then walked away looking pissed. After that, she didn't buy anything, floated around near the door, checking her phone and watching people carry items out. It felt off, but I had to keep calling numbers, settling tabs, answering questions about pickup and receipts. Alice asked if I was okay. I said, yeah, busy, and moved on to next bidder. 2 hours later, as the event was winding down with only a few people left packing glassware, the gray minivan reappeared in the parking lot and parked crooked. The woman walked straight up to me asking if any new lots had appeared. I repeated nothing new was coming, the auction was ending. Then she asked if she could inspect the community center's storage room, claiming there must be something interesting back there. I refused, explained the room belonged to the neighborhood association and only held event equipment. She turned around irritated and left, saying she'd be back earlier next time. After the auction, we'd raised a decent amount for the shelter, and I decided to cancel the planned second day since the volunteers were exhausted. I told everyone to go home and rest, no need to come back Sunday. We packed the leftover low-bid items into 2 SUVs, swept the floor, took down signs, and handed the keys to the association treasurer. By 4, the room was empty and the lot was quiet. I loaded my box of paperwork and the cash box into my car, locked the door, and did one walk through the hallway before leaving the building. I got home around 5 and started reconciling in a spreadsheet. Nothing fancy, just totals, and who still needed to pick up the lamp. I texted the board that day 2 was canceled, then sat down to double-check the cash count. My phone buzzed and it was my neighbor Alice who'd helped organize, calling instead of texting. She rarely calls. I answered and she sounded shaken, breathy. She said she had just gotten home to find her back door jimmied and a drawer dumped onto kitchen floor, saying someone had broken into her house while she was at the auction. Next morning I went to check on Alice. She opened the door slow and I saw it right away. Yellowing marks on her forearm and a dark line along her cheek. Not makeup. Real bruises. She said she'd gotten home around 4 p.m. to let the dog out and walked straight into her living room. And there was a guy bent over her TV console like he belonged there. He lunged when he saw her, shoulder first, knocked her sideways into the doorframe, and then he bolted down the hall. Her husband heard the crash and came running from his office, shouting, and the guy blew past him, slammed the back door open so hard it hit the stopper. The dog was going crazy, bowls skittering across the tile. Her husband chased to the yard, but the gate was swinging and the guy was already gone. He sprinted to the street in socks and caught a glimpse of a gray minivan turning the corner too fast, back end dipping like someone floored it, and he couldn't see plates. He kept saying he tried. He really tried. Like he needed me to know he didn't just stand there. I asked if it was specifically a gray minivan, and he stopped talking mid-sentence, blinked, and said, yeah, gray, and asked how I knew. So I told them about the woman from the morning, and then the auction, the way she kept asking about hidden items in a storage room that didn't exist, and the same van. Alice kept shaking her head, putting pieces together, and her husband said they were calling the police right now, like not in an hour, now. They put the dispatcher on speaker so I could repeat everything, descriptions, times, the forum post, the canceled second day, the van, and my home address in case that mattered. Didn't love saying that out loud, but it felt necessary. The officer who showed up walked through with a flashlight, even though it was daylight, pointing out pry marks on the back door and a footprint on the lower panel that matched the slam. The bedroom drawers were dumped, not ransacked exactly, more like straight to the point. Top drawers, jewelry box, nightstand, the small fireproof safe that wasn't locked properly because they'd pulled paperwork the week before. We all have something like that sitting half-latched, right? Cash gifts from a relative, a watch, a thin gold chain, gone. Living room camera didn't catch the entry because it was angled at the front. Their neighbor's doorbell camera pinged motion, but it only showed the dog walker at noon, and then nothing until after 5. There was a camera on the main road a block over, but the officer said those feed to the city, and they only keep clips for so long unless there's a flag. By afternoon, the detective called and asked me to come down or email a statement, whichever was faster. I typed it out that night with times from my phone photos of the auction table, because the pictures showed her in the background near the door. Headscarf, oversized tote with a zipper, sunglasses on top of her head indoors. Those little things you only remember when you stare too long. The detective said they'd circulate the description with pawn contacts. 2 days later, Alice texted a photo from a shop in the next town over where a bracelet turned up. The owner had logged it with a first name and a phone number that went nowhere, and the security footage looked like a hoodie and a hat. Nothing you could use. Weeks went by. The report stayed open, but quiet. The woman didn't come back to the forum, and nobody else in our group recognized her when I sent a cropped picture, just a blur of a smile and that tote. The cameras in our neighborhood only covered main streets, and the minivan didn't appear on any of them. The detective said maybe stolen plates, maybe no plates. We held on to the idea that the pawn slip would lead somewhere, but it didn't. Alice got back some of the stolen stuff that turned up at that shop, not all, just enough to make the house feel less violated, if that's even a thing. I replaced the locks on my place the same weekend, swapped the screws and the strike plates for longer ones, and put a cheap camera over my driveway, because it was what I could do immediately. The whole thing reminded me that even charity events can attract people with criminal intent, scoping out homes with valuable items, and looking back, her behavior was suspicious from the start, coming to my house before the auction, repeatedly asking about items not for sale, wanting access to storage areas, and she was probably casing which houses had good stuff and which owners would be away at the event. And Alice said the intruder knew exactly where to look for jewelry and cash, like he'd gotten information somehow. Maybe from watching people carry donations or overhearing chatter. Maybe she'd been to previous neighborhood sales building a mental map of who had what. And the police suggested she might be part of a larger operation targeting community events across different areas. And I still organize fundraisers for the shelter, but we're way more careful about security now. We don't advertise specific valuable items. We split events between locations. We coordinate with neighbors so someone's home during big gatherings. We walk people to their cars. We keep registrations separate from exits. It's not paranoia. It's planning. And trust in community gatherings took a hit after that, because you want to believe everyone coming to a charity auction has good intentions. But that's naive. And sometimes the people asking the most questions are the ones you need to watch closest. About 10 years ago, I was renting an apartment on the second floor of an old brick building in a quiet part of the city. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, so my schedule was flexible. I could work at night and sleep during the day. That night was a Tuesday. Around 4 a.m., I was finishing a project for a client, had to submit it by morning. I was sitting at the computer when I heard the sound of a car in the parking lot under my window. Our building stood in a U-shape. Inside was a courtyard parking lot. I looked out the window and saw an old sedan that drove in and stopped in the middle of the yard. I went back to work. A minute later, I heard voices. At first quiet, then louder. I went to the window again. 2 people were standing by that car and talking, actually arguing. One was a man in jeans and a jacket, the other a skinny guy in sportswear. They were talking in raised voices, but I couldn't make out the words because the sound bounced around the courtyard weird. Then the man in the jacket pushed the second one and he fell, palms smacking the asphalt. I thought I should call the police, but at that moment the guy got up. They said something else to each other, and the man in the jacket got in the car and left, headlights sweeping up the brick as he pulled out. The skinny guy stayed standing in the middle of the yard, then walked to the entrance. I decided it was just a drunk argument and went back to the computer, told myself, not my business. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand a little about the building. The courtyard lights were on motion sensors, and two near the entrance would flicker off if no one moved for a minute, so it went dim in the corners and then bright again when someone passed. My neighbor Pavel always parked his silver hatchback under those lights. Same spot, same angle. We'd swapped numbers one winter because of the plow piling snow, so if there was a problem, I could text him and he'd do the same. About 20 minutes passed. I'd almost finished the work when I heard noise again. This time loud, the sound of metal hitting metal, then another hit, spaced like someone counting. I took a breath and listened, thinking it might be someone dropping a bike rack, but then came another clean strike. I pushed the curtain with my wrist and looked down. The same skinny guy was standing by a neighbor's car and hitting the hood with something long, looked like a crowbar or pipe. He hit it several times, the hood buckling. Then he leaned across and smashed the headlight so bits of plastic hopped on the pavement. Then he kicked the car door hard and the panel popped with that hollow sound you never forget if you've ever been in a fender bender. He got in his car. Turned out he had a car too. I hadn't noticed it before, tucked at the far end by the dumpster. And he reversed sloppy, wheels skidding, then drove off with squealing tires. I stood at the window in shock. What was that? I said it out loud, like saying it would make it normal. I thought about calling the neighbor whose car was damaged, but it was 4 a.m. Didn't want to wake people and start a building-wide thing if the guy came back and saw lights turning on. Decided to wait until morning. I unlocked my phone anyway and typed a text to Pavel. Hey, your car got hit. I saw who. And then I deleted it because it felt reckless without a plate number. I told myself if he came back, I'd get the plate. Then I noticed something strange. On the ground by the entrance, something dark was lying. At first, I thought it was a garbage bag. The black contractor kind the cleaner leaves near the door before hauling to the bins, but nobody drags trash at 4. The sensor light clicked off, the whole entrance went gray, and for a second it disappeared. When it flicked back on, I looked closer, leaning my forehead against the glass to cut the glare and tracing the shape from shoes to shoulders. It was a person. I didn't immediately understand what was happening, because your brain always offers the easy file first. Someone sleeping it off, someone waiting for a ride. So I watched for any small movement. Nothing. No shift. No hand. The windows across the courtyard were dark except for a blue TV glow way over in the stairwell. I cracked my window an inch, the old frame making that sticky sound, and I called down, "Hey, you okay?" The word just fell into the yard. No answer. I called again, louder, asked if they needed help, that I could call someone, because that felt like the thing you're supposed to do. Still nothing. I thought about running down, but I also thought about the skinny guy and the way he swung on the car like it was personal. If he came back and I was out there, I'd be in it, and I didn't know if he was alone. I checked my phone battery, 12%, and stood there arguing with myself about whether to dial or go downstairs or both. I put my shoes on without tying them, and then took them off again. I kept looking for breath in the cold, for anything, but the air was still. At first, I thought it was a garbage bag, but then I looked closer. It was a person. I didn't immediately understand what was happening. The person was lying motionless on their side by the entrance. I grabbed my phone, a flashlight, and ran downstairs. I hit the stairwell so fast I banged my shoulder off the rail, Didn't even lock my door, just kept moving because what else do you do when someone's not moving and you're the one who saw it and now you can't unsee it? I pushed the entrance door and the sensor popped the light on, and right there by the mat was a woman, about 30, in a light blouse. The blouse was covered in blood, damp and darker near the buttons, and her face was bruised, her arm twisted strangely like the joint wasn't where it should be. I immediately understood. She'd been beaten. I said, "Hey, can you hear me?" And I crouched without touching her, trying to see her chest for any rise. I called an ambulance and police, yelling the number into the phone like volume would speed it up. The dispatcher asked me to check breathing. 2 fingers under her nose, watch the chest. And I said, yes, she's breathing, it's shallow. I don't know how long she's been here. I gave the address twice, spelled the street, explained courtyard access, told them the gate code because the keypad sticks if you don't press it hard. The woman made a little sound like air catching and I almost reached to straighten her arm, then stopped because the dispatcher said, "Don't move her neck, don't move anything, just keep talking, keep eyes open." I didn't know what to do, was afraid to touch her, so I aimed the flashlight down the path to the curb to wave the ambulance in, and I kept an ear on the street for sirens. It took maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. I lost the clock. When the first wail came around the corner, I stepped into the driveway and flagged them. The light hit the brick, and the whole yard looked thrown together. Paramedics got out fast, gloves, bag, neck brace. One asked me what happened and I said, "I don't know. I saw 2 guys arguing earlier. One pushed the other. Then later I heard banging and found her like this. They cut the blouse at the shoulder and I looked away, then back, because one of them asked if I was the caller and to stay for police. The police arrived, then more. Blue lights washed the windows, and I kept thinking people would wake up, but mostly it stayed dark. I was questioned all the remaining night, on the curb, in the entrance, then upstairs in my kitchen while an officer took notes on the counter next to my tablet. I told them everything I saw, the argument, the push, how the man left, how the guy hit the car with something long, how he drove off, the plate I didn't catch, the hoodie color I wasn't sure about. They checked my window sight line and asked which neighbor owned the silver hatchback, and I gave them Pavel's name and apartment number. Around sunrise, one of the detectives told me the woman was the wife of that man in the jacket. He'd beaten her in their apartment. Neighbors upstairs had heard some of it but thought it was TV. Then he went out to cool off. Those were the words they used, and came back and finished the job outside near the door. I heard myself ask if she was going to make it, and they said she was unconscious, but breathing when they got her. They were working on her at the hospital, and I could expect a call later for a formal statement. I signed a contact sheet, hands shaking a little, and they taped off the entrance and took my phone for 10 minutes to pull the time-stamped call log, and then handed it back. The skinny guy was his brother. He tried to stop him. That's why they pushed each other. That whole thing I watched from my window was a last-ditch attempt to keep him from going upstairs again. And when he failed, he did the only thing he had left in his head. He smashed the attacker's car and drove away. 'Cause he thought if the guy couldn't drive, he'd stay put until someone else intervened. It wasn't smart, but it made a kind of sense when you heard it like that. And the man in the jacket was arrested 2 days later at his job, because after the ambulance left, he hid and then pretended nothing happened. And the woman survived but was in the hospital for a month. And I gave testimony in court. I said what I heard and saw and kept my answers short because the prosecutor told me to stick to what I personally witnessed. And the feeling of guilt haunted me for months. I saw the fight, heard the hits on the car, but didn't understand a murder had happened. No, not a murder, a beating. And I went in circles about it. Like if I'd called right away, maybe the timeline shifts by 5 minutes and maybe that's enough. And sometimes at night it seems like I hear those metal hits, just two of them, spaced the same. And now, if I hear something strange outside my window, I always check and call the police if anything seems even slightly suspicious. Better 10 false calls than one missed life. And what keeps me up is thinking about those 20 minutes between when I saw the argument and when I heard the car being hit. She was lying there the whole time, bleeding, unconscious, and I was just sitting at my computer, finishing a design project like nothing was wrong. It happened 6 years ago, when I was 42 and had just bought my first camper van. I'm a nurse in Phoenix, and the job gets intense, so I started taking solo weekend trips to decompress. Just me, my little Winnebago Class B, and some trail or lake somewhere quiet. Most of the time I'd stay at proper RV parks with hookups, but occasionally I'd use BLM dispersed camping sites, those free spots way out in the middle of nowhere. Late April, I drove up toward Flagstaff on Highway 89, planning to find a mountain overlook where I could park for the night. About 6 hours from home, I turned onto a dirt fork marked as dispersed camping on my map. Spent the day hiking, cooked dinner on my portable stove outside, watched the sunset turn the rocks orange and purple. The turnoff was one of those washboard forest roads that rattle your teeth and make you wonder if your cabinets are going to eject your plates. I passed a faded BLM sign zip-tied to a T-post and a mile marker nailed to a Ponderosa, and then nothing but scrub and cinders. No bars on my phone, which is normal up there, so I set the paper map on the dash like I always do, just in case. I picked a pull-off with a little berm between me and the road, so my headlights wouldn't advertise me to anyone cruising by. Simple reasons, basic safety, nothing paranoid. When I cooked, I kept the flame low and the pan close so I could toss everything inside fast if the wind kicked up. My keys stayed clipped to a little carabiner on a cabinet knob. Habit from the hospital, where losing keys means calling facilities at 3 a.m. By 9 p.m., I was in bed in the back of the van, watching downloaded episodes of some show on my tablet since there was no internet out there. That's when I heard footsteps on the gravel outside, someone approaching the side door. I froze, turned off the tablet screen. I slid the tablet under a pillow, muted, and sat up, trying not to make the van rock because even that tiny movement feels loud out there. You learn to listen for certain things. Animals move erratic, people move with intent, and this was a steady human crunch coming straight in. I thumbed the lock buttons just to double check, even though I knew I'd already checked them twice before I brushed my teeth. He stopped at the driver's door instead of knocking on the sliding one, which told me he was thinking about the cab, the wheel, leverage. In these remote areas, I almost never encountered other people. That was the whole point. Maybe I'd parked somewhere I wasn't supposed to, and a ranger was coming to move me along, but it seemed late for that. The footsteps stopped right outside the driver's door, and a man's voice called out, raspy and rough. "Excuse me, sorry to bother you. I'm lost and need directions." I called back through the locked door that I couldn't help right now, but I'd be happy to show him my map in the morning if he wanted to come back then. I said, loud enough to carry but not cheerful, that I was settled for the night and couldn't open up. He asked for directions again, same exact phrasing, like he'd practiced it, and I repeated that morning would be better. There was silence for maybe 30 seconds, long enough that I thought he'd left. Then his voice came again. "Okay, I'll wait here." I asked, "Wait here? Like where exactly?" He answered, "Next to your vehicle." I have time. A normal lost person goes back to their car or keeps moving. I asked if his vehicle was nearby, if he needed mechanical help now. He said no. He just wanted to wait for me to help him with directions. Through the tiny back window of the van, I couldn't see him, but I could hear his shoes scuffing the gravel every few seconds. He was pacing or shifting weight, definitely still there. About 10 minutes passed, then I heard quiet thumps on the rear door, then on the side door, Then someone tried the driver's door handle. The latch clicked against the lock, once, twice, like he was testing the give. I yelled that I had pepper spray and would call the police if he didn't leave. His voice came back, still calm. "You don't have cell service out here, I checked." That sentence hit wrong. Not just the words, but how rehearsed it sounded. And it told me he hadn't just wandered up. He'd watched me pull in. Maybe when I set the paper map on the dash. Maybe when I cooked dinner. I kept my voice steady and said I was contacting my husband and friends anyway. I don't have a husband, but people say that helps. And I grabbed the pepper spray canister from under my pillow and climbed into the driver's seat without turning on any lights. Moving forward was loud in the tiny space. The seat track clicked, the keys tapped the column, so I did it slow. I slipped the keys off the carabiner by feel, kept the spray in my left hand with my thumb on the trigger, and I took a breath to listen again. He wasn't talking now, just that scuff like he wanted me to know he was still there. I turned the ignition. The engine caught with that high idle that always makes me wince at night, and when my headlights popped on, they washed over a man maybe 50 years old in a camouflage jacket, standing 3 yards directly in front of the van. He didn't move, didn't try to step aside, just stood there looking at the windshield. His hands were down at his sides, empty as far as I could tell, but he had that set to his footing like he'd decided where his weight belonged. I checked the mirrors. Berm behind me, a narrow rut on the passenger side, a low stump by the driver's side. Not great options for backing up fast without slashing a tire or getting stuck. He kept staring like this was a negotiation I hadn't agreed to. I rested my palm on the horn but held it, foot on the brake, spray ready, lights pointed right at his chest, watching for any shift that meant he was going to rush the hood or my door. I honked the horn twice. He still didn't move. I rolled forward an inch, then another, giving him more than enough time to step aside because hitting him, even then, would have ended everything in a worse direction. But he stood there like we were playing chicken, and he knew I was the one who cared about consequences. I turned the wheel hard and eased the van into a wide arc, bumping the rut with my right tires, clearing the stump with a scrape that made my teeth clack. Terrified of hitting him, but more terrified of staying. For a second, he was level with my open side window gap, and I tensed for a hand to shoot in, but he did nothing. Just let me pass so close, I could see a snagged thread on his sleeve. In my rearview mirror, I watched him slowly turn and walk back into the darkness, not hurrying, not running. Just a casual stroll like he had all the time in the world, like the game was postponed, not over. I kept the wheel straight and my speed steady until the washboard smoothed into the main dirt road, then onto the highway. Then I drove an hour to the nearest town and spent the rest of the night in a lit-up parking lot outside a 24-hour grocery store under those buzzing lamps that make everything look gray. At first light, I called the county sheriff's office, described what happened, where the pull-off was, what I had seen. The dispatcher was polite and asked a few clarifying questions, but basically said without a vehicle description or license plate, there wasn't much they could do, though they'd send a patrol through later. I sold the camper van 2 months later because every little noise after that sounded like footsteps, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched every time I was in it. And now I stick to hotels. Even cheap motels feel safer than isolated campsites. When my son said, "Aunt Brenda showed me special games, but she said it's a secret between us," I knew I'd failed to protect him from someone I'd welcomed into our lives. That sentence changed everything. The friendly neighbor who'd brought cookies and offered to babysit suddenly became a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I'm telling this story because I never reported her to the police, and that guilt eats at me every single day. Maybe if I explain what happened, someone else will see the signs I missed. It all started 6 weeks earlier, right after Dylan and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a family complex outside Seattle. We were rebuilding our lives after my ex-wife moved to another state, and I was just trying to figure out how to be a single dad. The neighbor across the hall, Brenda Collins, introduced herself the first day we moved in. 50-ish woman, living alone, said she used to be a child psychologist. She brought over homemade pie and seemed genuinely kind, offering to help us settle in. I was the exhausted construction company manager who could barely keep dinner and bath time straight, so her kindness felt like a lifeline. I hate admitting that now. She said if I ever needed to run downstairs to the laundry or grab a package from the office, she could sit with Dylan. 5 minutes tops. Looking back, it felt rehearsed. The first few weeks seemed normal enough. Brenda would chat with us in the hallway, always asking how Dylan's day went, bringing him coloring books and stickers. She mentioned she'd worked with children for 30 years before retiring, which made me trust her more. Stupidly, as it turns out. Dylan called her Aunt Brenda almost immediately because that's what she told him to call her, and I didn't think much of it at the time. She'd hug him every time we saw her in the corridor, kiss the top of his head, call him my little prince in this sing-song voice. I started noticing she always seemed to be there when we came home from daycare, like she was watching through her peephole and timing it. She'd pop out with some flimsy excuse. I baked too many muffins, or I have a new puzzle he'll love, and ask if he could come play at her place. I declined, kept it friendly, said we had dinner to make or a bath to run, but the invitations kept coming, a little pushier each time. One evening Dylan started telling me stuff he shouldn't understand. Why Mom left, that I looked tired 'cause Daddy's boss yelled about budgets. When I asked where he heard that, he said, Aunt Brenda asked me questions, and I answered. My stomach dropped. That kind of prying wasn't neighborly, it was probing. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand how stretched I was. I was still learning daycare pickup times, still fixing a punch list on a mid-rise project where every delay was on me, still figuring out how to make boxed mac and cheese without letting the pot boil over while Dylan asked 100 questions about everything. So I told myself Brenda was just lonely, that she missed working with kids, that I was being paranoid. But my gut kept screaming that something was off. She'd touch his hair and straighten his collar even when I was right there. She'd hold his hand too long in the hallway, stand too close when talking to him, keep her eyes on him instead of me. Not illegal, I kept telling myself, just weird. Until it wasn't. On a Saturday morning, I went downstairs to grab the mail and a package from the office, leaving Dylan watching cartoons. 5 minutes. Literally 5. The hallway was quiet, the kind where every footstep echoes. When I came back up, Brenda's apartment door was open, and she was standing there holding Dylan's hand, leaning down and speaking to him in this low, intimate voice I hadn't heard from her before. She looked up and smiled like nothing was unusual. He knocked because he got bored, she said, still holding his hand like it belonged to her. I thanked her, took my son back, said a tight, "Have a good day," and closed our door. My heart was punching through my ribs. I checked our deadbolt twice, then 3 times, pretended to be calm so Dylan wouldn't mirror me. I made grilled cheese for lunch with shaky hands. Dylan ate, kicking his feet against the chair, humming. I waited until he was building with blocks and said, as casually as I could, "Buddy, what games do you play with Aunt Brenda?" He shrugged, kept stacking. "Just special games." I asked what special meant. He wouldn't look at me now. Said she told him not to tell. That it was a secret between them. That I'd be mad if he said. I kept my voice even. Told him I wouldn't be mad at him ever for telling me something important. He fidgeted and said the line that burned itself into me. Aunt Brenda showed me special games, but she said it's a secret between us. I felt my face go hot, my hands cold. I asked what the games were. He clammed up, said, "I don't know," and then asked if he could watch more cartoons. I said yes because I didn't want to scare him, because every article I'd skimmed at 2 a.m. in the past warned about shutting kids down with panic. At bedtime, he was quiet, clingy. I read him 2 stories and left the hall light on. I sat on the floor outside his door and listened to his breathing even out. I couldn't call my ex, out of state, already on edge about my competence. I didn't want to confront Brenda across a thin hallway and tip her off. I needed to be sure. So I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and typed the ugliest words I could think of into the search bar. I fell into a rabbit hole. Grooming checklists, special secrets, My Little Prince, boundary testing, gift giving, isolating a child with questions about home life. And with each paragraph I read, I felt sicker. The next morning I knocked on Brenda's door without Dylan, my hands shaking with rage and fear. She opened like she'd been standing right behind it and gave me that sugary smile. I didn't bother with small talk. I asked her straight up what she'd been doing with my son and why she told him to keep secrets. For a split second, everything nice on her face dropped. I saw this flat look, cold and evaluating, like she was measuring what I knew and what I didn't. Then the smile snapped back on and she laughed it off, called me stressed, said she understood because single parenting is overwhelming, and she was only helping. I said again, no secrets, no touching, no special games. And she said she'd been doing educational exercises, fine motor skills, focus drills, a little sensory play. She talked fast and piled on credentials I didn't ask for. Decades with children, certifications, conferences, case studies. Like if she stacked enough words, it would make sense. Her eyes kept flicking just past me, down the hall, like she was checking if anyone could hear. I told her if she came near Dylan again, I'd call the police and Child Protective Services. Both. And I meant it. She stared at me a long beat, that same dead look leaking through. Then she said something like, "You're making a mistake," and shut the door. I stood there trembling, wondering if I'd just blown up good neighbor relations for nothing. But my gut said I'd finally drawn a line that should have been there from day one. I went back into my apartment and locked the deadbolt and the chain and moved a dining chair under the knob, which felt stupid, but I did it anyway. The day after, the hallway went quiet. No Brenda waiting by her peephole. No voice chirping, "My Little Prince." I saw her car still in its spot from the kitchen window by the sink, the white SUV with the parking pass on the mirror, so I knew she hadn't left town. She just vanished inside that unit. Somehow that was worse, like she was a loaded trap I couldn't see. I kept every interaction controlled. Dylan in and out of the apartment with me. No solo trips to the mailbox. No taking out trash without him right there, and the door locked behind us. I reminded the daycare to only release him to me or his mom. Wrote it in bold on the form. Added a password just in case. 2 days later, a package got misdelivered to her door. A small box with my name on it. I didn't knock. I left a note under her door asking her to leave it on the mat. It showed up hours later, box torn along one edge, like someone had started to open it and then thought better of it. Inside was a phone charger I'd ordered, nothing else, but I still felt that drop in my stomach. I started photographing everything. Our door, the hallway, the package, timestamps, because if anything happened, I wanted a record. I manage construction sites. Documentation is survival. At night, I heard the building sounds I'd never noticed before. Pipes knocking, elevator doors, a neighbor's TV through thin drywall, and I couldn't stop thinking one of those sounds was her at our peephole. Dylan asked why we weren't saying hi to Aunt Brenda anymore, and I said she was busy. He accepted that, kids do, but he stayed closer to me, and when he woke up from a nap and I wasn't in the room, He cried in a way he hadn't since he was 3. I moved a chair to block our balcony door, checked the window latches, kept my phone charger next to the couch so I'd never have to leave him to grab it. I wrote a draft email to CPS with everything I had and didn't send it, stared at the cursor blinking until my eyes hurt. After a week of silence, the air in that hallway felt like a held breath. I saw maintenance slip a note under her door about filter changes. No response on the hallway board. Her car didn't move. I found myself listening at our door before leaving, just to make sure I didn't hear hers open. I hated who that made me, but I hated the alternative more. 2 weeks later, Dylan and I moved to a different neighborhood because I couldn't sleep, knowing she was 20 feet away through 2 doors. I never filed a police report because I had no hard evidence, just a child's words and a parent's instinct, and I was afraid the system would tell us to go home and be careful while she stayed right there. I think about other kids in that complex, other parents running late, other 5-minute errands, and I hate myself a little for choosing certainty for us over risk for them, but I also know how it goes without proof. Dylan forgot about Aunt Brenda fast. Kids are built to forget, and I'm built not to. Now I know predators don't always look like anything except helpful. I watch every adult around my son, probably too closely. My ex says I'm paranoid. She didn't see the mask slip or hear the word secret come out of our kid's mouth. If the choice is paranoid and safe or trusting and sorry, I'll take paranoid every time, and that's the calculation I live with now. When I was 25, I met Tyler at a bookstore while looking for a bicycle repair manual. He was at the next shelf, thumbing through design books and some cycling magazine, and he made a comment about the old steel frame bikes being underrated, which is exactly the kind of thing that keeps me talking longer than I should. He looked 30-ish, neat beard, said he worked as a graphic designer and rode a fixed gear, and we ended up chatting for maybe 20 minutes about routes, the hills in our part of the city, and bands we both pretended we still followed. I told him I was an instructor at a gym and that I picked up evening shifts to cover rent. Nothing glamorous. Front desk sometimes, closing the floor most nights. When he suggested grabbing coffee later that week, I said sure, just to be polite. The coffee was fine, a normal meetup in a chain place near downtown, nothing dramatic. We traded the usual about work and bad clients and traffic, but he did this thing where he barely blinked and kept steering me into oddly narrow lanes of conversation. What time I opened the gym, which days I closed, the exact intersection where the gym sits, whether our side door actually locks, or if it's one of those temperamental commercial latches, which I brushed off as just over-curious. He also asked where I lived, and whether I biked the same way home every night, and I heard myself giving vague answers, tossing in depends on classes, and I swap routes if it's raining, trying to keep it casual. I didn't get a bad vibe in the moment, not exactly, but when I got home and the apartment was quiet, it hit me wrong. Like I'd been filling out a form I shouldn't have. He didn't text for a week, and by then I'd pretty much forgotten him. Then a message popped up. Tyler, apologizing for the silence, asking if I wanted to do a charity 10K that weekend. I was already locked in for my friend Marcus's birthday out of town, and Marcus was going big this year, turning 28, renting a house in the suburbs he shared with 3 guys, planning barbecue and volleyball and drinks, the usual chaos. It sounded like the kind of crowd Tyler claimed to like anyway, active, outdoorsy, blah blah, and it felt harmless to broaden the circle a bit, so I sent Tyler the address with a "come by whenever," figuring worst case he'd swing through for an hour and bounce. He replied almost instantly, "Def coming," like he'd been waiting with the text drafted. Marcus's birthday kicked off at noon. Weather held, grill smoke drifting over the driveway, coolers iced, folding tables lined up in the backyard. I rolled in with two of my buddies. We helped set up the speakers, arrange the trays, check the propane, all that. And by 6, the place was humming. Music, shouting over cornhole, someone burning the first batch of wings. Around 9, I got a text from Tyler saying he was slammed at work and probably wouldn't make it. So sorry, man. I was more relieved than I wanted to admit. Nothing against him, just different vibes. And I told him no worries, we'd link up another time. It crossed my mind that I'd handed a near stranger the location of a house full of drunk people. But then shots showed up, and my brain moved on. By midnight, the crowd thinned. Marcus said the plan was simple. Whoever was close would crash. 10 of us. Tops. There were 2 spare rooms upstairs and a rec room on the first floor with 3 couches. And I called one of those early because I had the first class in the morning and didn't want to be hunting floor space. A little after 1, I was in the first floor bathroom in sweatpants, toothbrush in hand, already thinking about which route home would dodge the morning traffic, when I heard the front door open. Not like a knock either. Key turn, hinge squeak, that low thud of a door closing gently. I stepped out into the dark hallway, and there was Tyler, just standing there with a soft duffel hanging off his shoulder, and this bright smile like we'd planned this. "Man, I decided to swing by and apologize in person," he said, voice low but way too casual. "Brought a gift for the birthday guy." He lifted the duffel slightly like that proved something. I stared at him because the house was basically asleep. Kitchen lights off, TV dead, only the stairwell lamp throwing a little glow on the landing. Marcus had gone upstairs half an hour earlier with a lockup behind you tossed at me. "Everybody's down for the night," I said. "You missed it." He nodded like I'd agreed to something. "Quick minute," he said. "I'll just hand it to him." He glanced past me up the stairs and I moved half a step to block that sight line without being obvious. I teach people how to brace under a barbell, but keeping drama down is its own skill. The duffel rustled when he adjusted it. I could see a corner of a wrapped box inside, shiny paper, taped clean, too neat for last minute. That was the first thing that made my stomach go tight, like he had planned this entrance even if he hadn't planned the apology. "Dude," I kept my voice normal, friendly even. "It's late. Marcus is out. You can leave it with me and I'll make sure he gets it." Swear I pointed at the small table by the coat rack, the only surface not covered in empty cups, because this wasn't complicated. He didn't move. His eyes kept sliding over my shoulder, cataloging, like he was checking who'd stayed and who hadn't. "So, which room is his?" he asked, and then he laughed like it was a joke, like he was just making conversation, and I said, "Upstairs," and instantly hated that I'd said even that much because it wasn't helpful. He was different from the coffee shop, that was the other thing. Less chatty, more focused, and it clicked that he'd asked about my shifts, because details were how he did everything. I told him again we were done for the night and lifted a hand toward the bag like, "Gift here." And I kept my other hand at my side, open, not tense, because you don't escalate in a stranger's house if you can avoid it. He smiled again, but his face didn't change with it. His shoes were quiet on the wood as he stepped past the threshold like he belonged there. I shifted to keep between him and the stairs. "Hey," I said, keeping it light. "Not trying to be a jerk, but people are sleeping. Just leave it." He looked at me, then past me, then back to me like I was an obstacle on a route he'd already mapped, and the duffel strap creaked in his hand as he adjusted his grip. I could hear a snore upstairs and the refrigerator motor humming and nothing else. "Look," I said, lower now. "It's over. Come by tomorrow." Tyler acted like he didn't hear me. He walked into the living room, sat on the couch, and started talking about the drive, traffic, work. I realized he wasn't going to leave. I told him I needed to sleep. He could drop the gift and head out. He nodded, slid the duffel under the coffee table, closed his eyes like he lived there. I stood there deciding if I should wake Marcus, but the house was quiet, and I didn't want to blow it up over a guest I'd invited, so I turned off the stairlight and lay on the other couch. I set my phone by my hip, screen down, volume up, tiny plan in case he acted weird. He looked asleep, arms crossed, breathing steady. I tried to relax and let my eyes rest. I wasn't sleeping, just counting breaths, when the cushion creaked and his shoes scuffed the rug. He came close enough that I felt his breath, and I kept still because maybe he was going to the bathroom. I didn't want to start some midnight chat. He crouched by my head and whispered fast, words I couldn't catch, tense like he was rehearsing. I started to say what, and he reached past me, grabbed a pillow from the other couch, and dropped it hard over my face. His weight came down with it, full body, both hands sealing. It was so sudden my brain lagged. The room shrank to fabric and pressure. I shoved at his wrists and couldn't get leverage. He'd set his feet like he'd done this in drills. I bridged and twisted, tried to hook his elbow, but he was heavier and steady. And for maybe 10 seconds there was no air, just that flat panic and the slide of the pillowcase under my fingers. The couch bumped the wall. Something in the duffel thumped. Then, as cleanly as he'd started, he let go. I rolled off the couch and up to my feet, coughing, nose burning. He'd stepped back 2 meters, hands open at his sides like he was showing pockets, completely calm. "What the hell are you doing?" I said, not loud, and he didn't answer. He looked at me once, picked up the duffel, and walked straight to the door. The latch clicked, night air moved, his car turned over and idled, then faded. I locked the door top and bottom, checked the slider and the side door, and shut the stair gate. I thought about waking Marcus, but it was after 1. There were no marks, and dragging everyone in without proof felt pointless. So I sat by the entry until the hallway clock said 3 and dozed sitting up. At 7, I told Marcus what happened. He rubbed his face, looked for bruises, asked why I hadn't woken him, then said he didn't want HOA drama or cops if it was a misunderstanding. We had no last name, no plate, nothing. The conversation stalled. A week later, Tyler texted like we were fine. "Coffee?" And I blocked his number, blocked him on the one app we shared, told the gym staff not to page me if he showed up, and I shoved a chair under my apartment door like I was 20 again. And I still don't know what that was. An attempted murder, a psychotic episode, or some test he needed to run on a person dumb enough to be polite. And that not knowing is the part I can't file away. The 10 silent seconds under the pillow making me rehearse 100 better reactions I didn't have when I needed them. The moment he mentioned my pink house on Maple Street, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as cold realization washed over me. This wasn't a client. This was a predator, and I'd just driven us 20 miles into empty countryside. Let me back up to that morning when everything still seemed normal. A guy named Ryan Wells had called the agency around 9 asking about properties in the 400K range. Sounded professional. Asked all the right questions about school districts and resale value. I agreed to show him 3 houses starting at 11, and since the first property was out on rural roads, I offered to drive. My SUV handled gravel better than most rentals. He showed up on time, mid-30s, business casual, leather briefcase, looking exactly like every other out-of-town buyer I'd worked with that month. We loaded into my car, and I pulled out of the office parking lot, thinking this would be a standard 2-hour showing. He made easy conversation at first, rates, comps, contractor referrals, and I pointed out the turnoff that avoids the washout on County 12. The first 10 minutes were textbook. He asked about average days on market, HOA restrictions, Typical closing costs for the area. Then his questions started shifting personal. He wanted to know how long I'd been working solo, whether I had family nearby, if I lived in this county, or commuted from the city. I kept my answers vague the way we're trained to, but something in his tone made my skin prickle. He wasn't making small talk, he was gathering information. When I mentioned the school district ratings, he interrupted to ask if I had kids myself, where they went to school. I said I preferred to keep things professional and steered back to the properties, but I caught him smiling in my peripheral vision. It wasn't a friendly smile. The paved road ended and we hit gravel. We were passing through a stretch of farmland with no other cars in sight when he made a comment about gas prices, then casually added that he'd noticed I always filled up at the Shell station on Riverside Drive. I'd never mentioned that station, never posted about it, never told any client where I got gas. My breath caught, but I tried to play it cool and asked him how he knew that. He just chuckled and said he liked to research the people he worked with. The way he said "worked with" sounded off. I eased my phone closer in the cup holder with the edge of my hand, screen down. 5 minutes to the ridge and a turnout. Spotty service past the second cattle guard. No neighbors in earshot. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand the route. From the office, you take 19 to County 12, lose bars after the old billboard. Then it's fields and a long blind hill before the farmhouse. If anything went wrong between here and the mailbox, no one would see it. I told myself to stick to the plan, show the house, keep distance, get him back to town, and not to react to bait. He loosened his tie and rolled his shoulders like he was settling in. He asked if the farmhouse had a basement. I said yes, unfinished, exterior access only. He nodded at that like he'd been hoping to hear it. He started testing boundaries in small ways, adjusting the AC without asking, letting his knee drift into my space, saying my name even though I hadn't given him my first name today. I corrected him once, and he acted surprised. Said he'd seen my name tag last week when he drove by the office. I never wear a name tag. We crested the hill, and the valley opened up. Empty pastures and a line of cottonwoods and nothing else. I kept my hands steady at 10 and 2, and said we'd reach the property soon. He said he preferred to see it without the lockbox, because he didn't like feeling watched. I told him that wasn't how it worked, and he laughed under his breath. Then he said it, like he was commenting on the weather. That pink house on Maple Street looks real cozy in the evenings when you've got that porch light on. The sentence landed like a dropped tool in a quiet room. That was my address, my actual home, a detail I never shared with clients for exactly this reason. I didn't look at him. I kept the SUV centered in the lane and the speed steady because stopping on an empty road with a stranger who knew my address didn't make sense. "How do you know where I live?" I asked, flat. His whole demeanor changed in an instant. The friendly buyer act dropped away, and his voice went cool and literal. "Don't get dramatic," he said. The briefcase slid a little on the floorboard with the washboard gravel. I pictured the lockbox key in my center console and mentally moved it to the far side of the cup holders. He reached into his jacket, slow, and I braced for something worse than what he actually pulled out. His phone. Without breaking eye contact, he turned the screen toward me, angled so I could see without taking my eyes off the road. It was a photo of me leaving Trader Joe's 3 days ago. Blue blouse, reusable bags, sunglasses pushed up in my hair. He swiped to the next one. Me at the Shell station, hand on the pump. Swipe, me locking the office door at dusk. Swipe, me watering the front planter at the pink house. My fingers tightened on the wheel and I said, "This showing is over. I'm taking you back to town." He shook his head once, almost bored, like I wasn't hearing the instructions. "That's not what's happening," he said. I nudged my charging cable with my thumb. thinking maybe I could pull it free and use the cord as an excuse to reach for my phone. But he noticed the movement and set his forearm on the center console, casual blockade. "Ryan," I said, and he smiled like he'd been waiting to hear me use his name. "You're scaring me. If you want to see the farm, we'll see it, but you don't get to talk about my home." I wasn't trying to win an argument. I was trying to keep him predictable until I had a turnoff. "Liza," he said softly. I hadn't told him my first name today. "This is where you listen." He held the phone higher, angling it so the sun wouldn't wash it out, then zoomed one of the shots until my face filled the glass. "You're predictable," he said. "Routine is safety, right? It's also a map." His voice had no heat in it, like he was giving feedback in a meeting. He tapped the edge of the screen with his thumb, patient, like this had been rehearsed. "I've got about 40 more," he said quietly. "So let's not do anything stupid like calling the cops or trying to jump out, okay?" My mind was racing, but I forced myself to think like I do on bad showings, stick to a script and give him something that sounded official. So I told him we needed to grab the lockbox key from the property manager's office at Riverbend Plaza, and said it casually like we always do that on Saturdays. And I watched his eyes while I said it, no blinking, his hand still tucked in his jacket like there was something in there. Then he asked which office, and I said, "Suite 104 by the main entrance," without hesitating, even though I had no idea what was actually in Suite 104. And after a long beat, he nodded once like he decided it wasn't worth arguing on the road where I had the wheel. So I took the next right toward the plaza. We rolled into the lot and it was packed. Rows of cars, strollers, a couple vendors setting up near the fountain, and a group of teenagers unloading folding tables and speakers from the back of a pickup, which was perfect because bodies mean witnesses. And I eased us into a spot by the main doors, camera domes right above, and killed the engine while saying, "It'll be quick," like I didn't want to waste his time. And he got out with me, close enough that our sleeves brushed, that hand still in his pocket, head angled to watch my elbows, and I walked like I knew exactly where I was going, toward the glass vestibule and the lobby beyond. The second I saw the security desk, I peeled off hard left, like I just remembered a question, and I told the guard, low voice, fast, no pauses, that the man behind me was threatening me and had been stalking me, that he had my address on his phone and had implied a weapon, and the guard looked past me and saw him and his whole face changed. He put one hand up to slow foot traffic and grabbed his radio with the other, saying code words I didn't understand, and I pointed at Ryan and Ryan's face went from blank to furious in one flick, and instead of arguing or trying to play nice, he turned and sprinted for my SUV, and two other guards were already running from the opposite entrance, but he was fast. He popped the driver door, found the fob still in the console, and the engine turned over and he jammed it in reverse. Tires chirped, people yelled, and he shot out of the lane and cut between rows, then angled toward the far exit and was gone before anyone could block him. I stayed behind the desk while the guard pulled a roll-down gate halfway and told me to keep my head low, and I called 911 while he was still on the radio, and then everything turned procedural, which helped because the responding officers asked for the timeline and I gave it to them clean. The call at 9, the fake buyer name, the drive, the shell comment, the photos on his phone, the exact words he used. And I described him: height, build, the cheap watch, the scuffed heel on his left shoe, and handed them the email chain he'd used to confirm and the number from the missed call earlier that morning. They took me to a little back room and had me write a full statement. The mall pulled footage from the exterior cams that showed him running to my SUV and me going straight to the desk. And an officer put out a bolo on my plates and said they'd ping local flock cameras. And they asked if he'd shown a weapon, and I said I hadn't seen one, just the posture and the pocket. And a detective came in and told me to assume he'd circle back for my house keys or info. So they sent a patrol to watch my street while I called a locksmith from the room, and then my broker to report the incident and request a lockbox audit for every rural listing scheduled that week. 2 days later, they found my SUV on a county road by a drainage culvert. Doors unlocked, console wiped, no fob, and the detective said the interior had been cleaned with something harsh, and the plates had a light coat of spray to blur the characters on traffic cams, which meant he planned this to at least a mid-level detail, and the phone number he'd used was a prepaid that burned out right after his last call to me, and the email was brand new with nothing else attached, and the footage gave them a decent angle on his face, but it didn't hit on anything in their system, and my case file shifted to inactive pending new info before the month was over. They never caught him, and I hate that sentence, because my routines had to change in a way that doesn't feel like a choice anymore. I don't meet clients alone, ever. I use a chaperone service for rural showings. My office has a panic button under every desk. There are cameras around my house and on my porch, and pointed at my driveway, and I still do the job because it's what I'm good at. But I check my mirrors at every light, and I scan gas stations before I pull in. And if a man in business casual walks toward our storefront, my stomach drops like I missed a step on the stairs. The first time Ray suggested I take off my shirt for test shots with natural light, I should have walked out right then. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That summer after junior year, I needed money and found this ad in the local paper. A photographer needed an assistant for portrait shoots, helping with equipment and learning the trade. Sounded perfect. When I called, this guy Ray picked up and explained he specialized in portraits. He even offered to drive me to his studio since it wasn't near any bus lines. My mom talked to him on the phone for like 2 minutes and gave me the green light, which honestly seems insane now. On the drive over, Ray mentioned his last assistant was also a high school kid, now 19, and they'd become really close, working on big projects together. The way he said close stuck with me, like he was tasting the word. He asked about sports, if I lifted, if I was disciplined, just small talk, but it felt like he was measuring me, and I told myself I was being dramatic because I really needed the job. The studio turned out to be a 1-bedroom apartment with blacked-out windows and gear jammed everywhere, soft boxes stacked by the closet, a paper backdrop on a crossbar, yellow tape marking where stands shouldn't go. First 2 days were actually legit. He showed me how to set up lights, white balance, tether to his laptop. I'd come after lunch and stay until evening, hauling cases, swapping batteries, running to the corner store for gaffer tape. The models were regular people, senior photos, a realtor headshot, a mom getting updated pictures for work. He called me kiddo and kept it professional, and I started to relax. Then on day 3, he asked me to stay late to discuss future projects and pulled out a bottle of wine. When I said I was underage, he laughed and said, "My assistants always have a glass. No big deal." He started showing me photos of his previous helper, and the pictures got progressively more personal, clearly not shot in any session I'd helped with beach, bedroom, mirror, his lighting studies. He moved closer, hand on my shoulder like he was checking my posture, and asked if I'd ever thought about being in front of the camera. I told him I was there to learn the job, not model. He shrugged and poured more wine, kept talking about brand campaigns and doors that open when you trust the process. When I left, he hugged me a second longer than normal. It wasn't a grope or anything, just too long. After that night, everything felt different. He started touching me more during explanations, straightening a collar that didn't need straightening, brushing my arm while I held the reflector, offering to massage my shoulders because I carried tension for a 17-year-old. He made comments about how I looked. "You've got symmetry. Jawline is money." Like he was talking about a lens he wanted to buy. Once he suggested I sleep over at the studio since it was getting late, even though my house was 30 minutes away, tops. I said my mom wanted me home, and he gave this tight smile. Of course, of course. And the next day, he barely spoke to me, just pointed where he wanted lights and typed on his phone. Nothing obviously inappropriate, just this off thing where I felt like I'd failed a test I didn't agree to take. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand I wasn't trying to be a hero or anything. I needed money, and I figured finishing the week would look better than quitting midway if I needed a reference. That was my logic, not bravery. And maybe I hoped I was reading it wrong, that I'd show up and we'd be back to ISO, aperture, and bring me the 85. Day 5 started normal. Carry the gray seamless, clamp the V flat, wipe fingerprints off the 85 he liked, charge the flashes. He said a client canceled and we could use the time for tests. He pulled the blinds to get strips of sunlight across the backdrop, set a stool in the beam, tethered the camera. Jump in for a sec so I can dial exposure, he said, easy voice, like it was no big deal. I sat with the reflector in my lap while he metered and took a few frames. Okay, he said. Now let's see bone structure. Shirt off, just for a minute. I felt my face heat up, but my voice came out steady. I said I wasn't comfortable with that, and I was done. I told him I wouldn't be coming back. He stared like I'd misheard him, asked if I was serious. I said yes. He took a breath, nodded once, and said, "All right. Let's get you home." No argument, no guilt trip, nothing. Weirdly, he didn't try to save it. He closed the laptop, killed the lights, and told me to grab my stuff. I slid my notebook into my backpack and did a quick scan so I wouldn't leave anything that made me come back. I even checked under the stool, which makes no sense, but my brain was sprinting. He walked me to the door like I was a delivery he needed to drop off before dinner. In the hallway, his hand hovered near my shoulder like muscle memory he'd caught mid-air. We went down the stairs without talking. At the curb, he unlocked the passenger side and waited while I buckled up. Habit. And also, I didn't want to give him a reason to stop. He drove the speed limit, both hands on the wheel, not even glancing over when I said I could get out at the main road. He just kept going. The ride back was silent. I didn't think much about it for years. I told my mom the job was boring, lots of cleaning, not much actual camera time, and I found something else bussing tables, which paid cash, and nobody asked me to take my shirt off at a restaurant. Then in college, sophomore year, I read this article about grooming in a class I took to fill credits, family violence and prevention, and it was like someone printed a checklist with Ray's name at the top. Isolated location, check. Building trust through teaching and praise, check. Gradually blurring boundaries, check. Offering alcohol, check. You have potential talk, check. It wasn't even dramatic on the page, just steps people take because it works, and I felt my stomach do that slow drop because none of this was random. His previous assistant probably went through the same process and didn't get out in time, and I hated that my first thought back then was, maybe I'm overreacting, instead of, this is a pattern. At 17, I just knew something felt off, and I was embarrassed to name it, so I called it boring and moved on, which was easier than saying my boss wanted pictures of me without a shirt. Now, before I make it sound like I turned into some crusader, I didn't. I had classes and rent and a roommate who never did dishes, and the whole thing sat in a drawer in my head with other stuff I didn't want to unpack. But for a while, I couldn't stop replaying small moments I'd brushed off. Him locking the door during a shoot for sound, the way he said close about the other kid, the sleepover if it's late line. Each thing alone was nothing. Together it was the roadmap the article described. I remembered the bottle of wine had no label I recognized, like it was poured into a decanter on purpose, and how he always had the blinds closed, and how he managed where I stood in the room as much as where lights stood. And I kept thinking, okay, I got out. But who didn't? I never told my mom the real reason I quit. because at that point it felt like a confession I'd let it get that far, which is dumb, I know. And she was working 2 jobs and didn't need something else to worry about from 3 years ago. Sometimes I looked at the classifieds in the campus paper and wondered how many teenagers answered those vague assistant wanted creative ads with no company name and thought they were getting a head start. A few years after graduation, I finally sat down to look him up, not to confront him or anything, just to see. I dug the old notebook out. There was a page where I wrote his number and the address with a note to bring AA batteries, and I punched the number in. Disconnected. I tried a reverse lookup site and got nothing, which could mean it was a burner or a prepaid thing under a different name. I searched his full name plus photography and got a different Ray with wedding packages in another state. I checked my email in case I'd missed a message from that summer, but everything with him had been phone and in person, no trail. I typed the exact address and studio and got a listing for an apartment that had been renovated since. New photos, new paint, no mention of a photographer ever being there. I even tried to find the ad in the local paper's digital archives, but the site only went back 5 years, and even then, it was spotty. So he was either gone or renamed or both, which was somehow worse than finding him. The thing that really gets me now is how textbook it all was. The too friendly approach right off the bat, the mentions of his young former assistant like it was totally normal, the slow shift from professional to inappropriate so gradual I almost didn't notice, like he was testing the fence for weak spots. I got lucky that my instincts kicked in when they did. Lucky I had a ride home and an excuse that landed. Lucky he didn't push harder in that moment, because I don't know what would have happened if he'd blocked the door or if I'd agreed to, just a minute, shirt off. A few years ago, I tried looking Ray up again out of curiosity. Same disconnected number, no trace that matched the apartment or the gear. And part of me wonders if he just moved to a new city and started over with fresh ads in different papers. Same script, new kids. The thought keeps me up sometimes. Not in a dramatic way, just in that stupid way where you stare at the ceiling and count the steps, and realize there are kids right now hearing, "You've got symmetry," and thinking it's a compliment. I'm 30 now, and I still can't look at photography studios the same way. Closed blinds, black backdrops, a stool in a beam of light, and trust doesn't come easy anymore, especially with people in positions of authority who control access to something you want. I tell younger guys I meet through work or friends to listen to that uncomfortable feeling in their gut, even when they can't explain exactly what's wrong, and to leave the second someone asks for more than they signed up for. I used to work the night shift as a nurse at a small clinic about 30 minutes from my home. My shift ended at midnight, and I always drove home alone on a deserted 2-lane road. I was used to the route and usually listened to audiobooks to keep from falling asleep at the wheel. That night there was fog and visibility was poor. I was driving slower than usual, carefully watching the road. Halfway there, I noticed a silhouette on the shoulder, a woman hitchhiking, clutching some bundle to her chest. I don't usually pick up hitchhikers, but this was the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was 20 miles away, and it was cold. I slowed down. The woman was about 40, in a worn jacket, her hair disheveled. She was holding a shopping bag. I cracked the window first and asked if she was okay, and she leaned down and said, almost breathless, that she needed a ride just a few miles. I hesitated because our clinic had a policy about off-hours contact, and also because I'm not dumb. But there wasn't another car in sight, and standing there in that fog, she looked like trouble the weather would finish, not start. So I unlocked the door and told her to keep the bag on her lap and buckle up. She thanked me for stopping and got into the front seat, saying her car had broken down a couple miles back and she needed to get to Hillsborough. It was on my way. I nodded and pulled away. We drove in silence for about 5 minutes. I tried to make conversation, asked what happened with her car. She said something vague about an overheated engine, but the details didn't add up. I knew a bit about cars thanks to my mechanic father. She said the temp light never came on, but the engine was smoking. Then said the battery died too, which doesn't line up. And when I asked what she saw on the dash, she shrugged, like she hadn't really looked. I decided not to nitpick. Maybe she was just nervous. Then I noticed a strange thing. She kept glancing at the side mirror, as if waiting for someone or hiding from someone. Her hands gripped the bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. I asked if everything was all right. She turned to me sharply and answered too quickly that yes, everything was fine. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand my route. There are only 2 real turns before the highway. The first passes an old service road that cuts into the woods and loops back to the county line, and the second hits the main interchange with the gas station and a closed way station. I've taken that road for years, and I know which shortcuts actually save time and which just sound like they do when someone wants you off the main drag. Then she added that I could turn onto the old road through the woods, saying it would be faster. I knew that road. It was longer, not shorter, and led in the opposite direction from Hillsborough. My instinct told me something was wrong. I said no, sorry, I'd take the main road. The atmosphere in the car immediately changed. The woman fell silent, but I could feel her staring at me. She shifted the bag like it was heavy on one side, tucked it between her knees, and I heard something lightly knock against the paper. Maybe a jar, maybe metal. I couldn't tell over the wipers. I kept both hands at 10 and 2 and told myself not to overreact. Fog slid over the windshield in sheets, and the reflectors on the lane lines popped up, bright and then gone, and I stuck to the posted limit. A minute later, she asked if she could make a call. Her phone had died. I said sure, and reached for my bag on the back seat at the next straightaway, because I keep a spare charger and an old work phone in there for patients who get stranded after hours. Small town problems. She said no. She just needed my phone, just for a second. And her voice had that thin insistence like someone holding back a cough. I told her I don't hand my phone to anyone while driving and I could plug hers in at the station. She went quiet, then asked who was on call at the clinic tonight, like she knew the place. That put me on edge, 'cause I don't introduce myself to strangers like that, and I hadn't said where I worked. I asked how far her car was and she said 2 miles back, maybe 3. She couldn't remember. Then tried again about the old road, said there were fewer cops that way. I said, why would that matter? And she smiled without showing teeth and said, people get tickets out here for nothing. I was about to give her my phone when it rang, my friend calling. I answered on speaker. My friend chatted about something and I made agreeable sounds, but out of the corner of my eye I saw the woman tense up even more. She kept smoothing the bag like she was calming a pet, eyes flicking to the mirror every few seconds as if expecting headlights to rise behind us. My friend asked if I was still on the back road, and I said yes, and she launched into a dumb story about a coworker, and I let her talk because the voice filled the car and made me feel like I wasn't alone with this stranger, and also, I'll admit it, it told the stranger I wasn't isolated. The woman finally whispered, almost to herself, you can just drop me before the lights. And then louder, actually, could you pull over right after the bend? I'll walk from there. I said that wouldn't be safe in the fog and that we were close. When the conversation ended, I said in 5 minutes there'd be a gas station where she could charge her phone. She suddenly said, stop here, like she decided it before I spoke. We were in the middle of the woods, still 3 miles from the gas station by the mile markers. I told her I'd take her to the station. There would be people, chargers, maybe a tow number posted. She cut me off. No, "Stop now." And her hand hovered near the door handle like she might bail even if I didn't. I braked and eased onto the narrow gravel shoulder because fighting about it in moving traffic wasn't worth a wreck. Before I was fully stopped, she popped the latch, shouldered her bag, and hopped out. No thanks, no goodbye. She didn't walk along the shoulder either. She angled into the trees, fast, stepping over the ditch like she knew the ground there. For 30 seconds I sat with the hazards clicking and the fog making its own weather around the beams, trying to process the way she'd watched the mirror and that weird insistence about the old road. Then I pulled back onto the lane and kept going, hands tight on the wheel, eyes on the next sign. At the station, the forecourt was bright and empty, except for the clerk behind glass and a single pickup at the far pump. I parked by the air machine and went inside. I told the attendant I'd given a ride to someone acting off and asked if he could take a quick look at my car, just in case she'd messed with something. I knew that sounded paranoid, but it felt necessary. He nodded like he'd heard stranger things and grabbed a flashlight. We did a slow walk around. Doors, gas cap, windshield wipers. He crouched by the passenger side and checked under the skirt. "Looks fine," he said. And then he asked if I wanted him to check the trunk because sometimes people swipe roadside emergency kits, flares, that kind of thing. I hit the release. He lifted the lid, played the light over the spare and jumper cables, then paused. This yours?" There was a black duffel jammed tight against the back seat wall, not mine. It hadn't been there when I left work. My trunk only had the kit and a folded blanket from last winter. He set it on the ground between us. It was weighty, but not crazy heavy, soft-sided, zipper taped at one end with a piece of clear packing tape like someone had closed it in a hurry. I didn't touch it. He looked at me. I shook my head. "Not mine," I said. He tugged the zipper just enough to peek and then zipped it back. "You should see this." We stepped inside under the camera, onto the tiled entry, and opened it on the counter so both of us and the camera had a clear view. Inside were bundled stacks of cash and rubber bands, mixed bills but mostly 20s, plus a small wallet insert with 2 credit cards and a folded paper with hand-scribbled totals. Different names on the cards, neither of them the woman in my passenger seat, if that was even her name, which I realized I never got. The attendant didn't waste time. He lifted the phone and called the sheriff's office, gave our location and a quick version of what I'd said. He told me to lock my car and wait inside. 2 deputies arrived maybe 8 minutes later. Their ETA matched the distance to the substation. One stayed with us, one looked at my car, then they both took photos of the bag and the contents. I answered questions. Where I'd picked her up, what she wore, what she said about Hillsborough and the old road, the way she'd watched the mirror. I explained the phone call and how she'd bailed the minute we kept to the main route. The deputy asked if we'd stopped anywhere else. Number. He nodded like it fit a pattern. He said a string of store robberies had run north along the county line the last 2 nights. Small convenience stores hit fast right before close. Suspects described as 1 woman and at least 1 male accomplice waiting nearby. The totals on the paper matched what had been taken from 2 shops that evening, down to the change roll count. They told me the old road cut to a turnout where cell service died and cameras didn't cover, and it was a spot they knew people used for exchanges. The working theory, he said, was she was trying to steer me there so a car could meet us. They'd grabbed the duffel from my trunk. Why risk their plates on a stop when they could use mine? And I'd be told to keep driving, or worse, depending on whether I was alone. When I answered my friend's call, that changed the calculation. Now I had a real-time witness to my route and timing, which spooked her. The deputy asked if she touched anything else, and I remembered she'd been fidgeting with the door pocket, so he swabbed it and the handle for prints. They kept the duffel and took my statement. They asked if I wanted an escort home. I said yes, because I'm not trying to be brave for no reason. A cruiser tailed me to my street, then peeled off after I waved from my driveway and checked my back seat like I always do after night shifts. They never found her. The department called me a week later to say the cards were stolen and the cash traced to the robberies by the strap counts. The prints were partials, nothing in the system. I drive the same road now, but I don't stop for anyone. Not anymore. And I pop the trunk before I ever get behind the wheel. Sometimes, when the fog lays low and the trees close in and there's no one behind me, I think about how close that was. If my friend hadn't called right then, if I'd taken that old road like she wanted, and I picture that turnout and a second car waiting with its lights off, then I just keep going. When I was 18, I was running track for this local athletic team and training for regional competitions. The coach, this guy in his mid-40s, offered extra sessions at his house since he had a full gym set up in his basement. He sometimes did individual training for athletes he thought had potential. My parents knew him for years and trusted him completely. First session was normal, hour and a half of drills, coach giving feedback on technique. Afterward, he offered me a sports drink and mentioned next time I could stay longer to watch footage and analyze it. Seemed like a good opportunity to improve my times. Second session was also productive. We did starts, block work, then plyos until my legs shook in a good way. At the end, he kept me back to review video where we analyzed jumping technique. We sat close at the same screen, and he kept putting his hand on my shoulder while pointing out mistakes. I told myself it was just coaching contact, precise cues, nothing weird. He kept the video looping, slowing plays frame by frame, explaining angles, and I nodded like a robot. Third session, I was changing in this makeshift locker room, just a small room next to the gym, when the coach walked in without knocking. Said he was bringing a towel. He apologized but didn't leave right away. Just stood there asking how I felt and if I was ready to train. I paused, said yeah, and reached for my shirt because there wasn't anywhere to hide. He finally backed out, door half closed, voice still going about cadence and form. The workout was intense, timed sets on the rower, then circuits. Afterward, he again suggested staying for video analysis. This time, he showed not just athletic footage, but personal videos from past trips, the team hanging out after races. I noticed the camera often focused on athletes in the locker room, filmed without them knowing. When I pointed it out, he laughed and said it was just behind-the-scenes stuff for motivation. I decided it was time to leave, but he insisted I stay for dinner, said his wife made enough for everyone. Except his wife wasn't home. Coach said she was stuck at work, but food was ready. He scooped pasta onto plates and set them on the little kitchen table, talking about hydration like it was a team meeting. We ate, and he put on some movie about a famous runner, then sat on the couch in the living room. I took the far cushion, but he still ended up near me, remote in his palm. During the film, he moved closer and started asking personal questions. Did I have a girlfriend? How did I spend free time? What were my plans after high school? The questions got more intrusive and I kept my answers flat. He leaned in, knee touching mine, then pulled back like it hadn't happened. When he asked if my parents were strict and if they checked my phone, I changed the subject to training, which didn't stick. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand why I stayed. He'd been around forever, drove us to meets, called my dad buddy, told my mom I had potential. He held the stopwatch and the gate to scholarship talk, and he was the one texting encouragement after bad races. You don't want to be the dramatic kid who misreads something and blows up a team. That was my headspace, right or wrong. He paused the movie, looked at me instead of the screen, and asked again about life after high school. Said he had contacts who could help, if you're serious. Then he put his hand on my knee and asked if I trusted him. I stood up so fast the couch creaked and said my parents were expecting me home. He didn't push it, just smiled tight, grabbed his keys and said, "Let's get you back." He drove me back quickly, talking the whole time about the next training session, drills and videos and a time slot he'd hold just for me. I stared out the window and said I'd let him know. Inside, I texted my parents and showered. The next day, he sent a link and asked about Thursday. I said school, then sore. I stuck to group practices. When he asked if I was ducking him, I said I was tired. After that, I avoided the individual sessions, claiming I was busy or tired. Years passed and I was in college when I heard from a former teammate that the coach got fired after parents of another athlete complained. He said it fast, like ripping a bandage, then added that details weren't public, but apparently it was serious, like meetings with the board and a quiet announcement. That's when everything clicked for me, like every small weird thing from those sessions lined up in order. I was sitting on a bench outside the library, phone on speaker, and I remember staring at my shoes because there wasn't anything else to look at that wouldn't pull me off the call. He asked if I ever noticed stuff, like him being too friendly or hanging back in hallways, and I said I didn't want to get into it on the phone, but yeah, there were things. I didn't tell him about the knee or the locker room or the way he paused the video and watched me instead of the screen. I didn't want to make it about me or start saying a bunch of stuff I couldn't take back later. He said parents had emailed the league and then other stories came in. Nothing shocking by itself, just a chain that made sense when you laid it out. Isn't that always how it goes? Now, before I explain what I did with that, you need to understand I had kept it quiet for years. I never told my parents the real reason I stopped training with him. I just said I wanted to focus on academics and a part-time job, which was true enough to not feel like a lie. I didn't want the drama, didn't want to be pulled into meetings, didn't want my name in conversations that would follow me. The only person I had ever hinted to was a roommate when we were talking about weird authority figures, and even then I kept it vague. Old coach got too familiar. I bounced. Those locker room videos were the ones that stuck in my head after that call. I could still see the angles, the way the camera lingered, the way he laughed it off as motivation, and I felt my stomach do that slow twist. You know the one. Like when you realize the door you thought you locked is still open. I remembered him walking into the makeshift locker room with the towel excuse, and it stopped feeling like a clumsy accident and more like a temperature check. Building trust through professional help, isolating with the extra work, crossing small lines that seemed harmless in the moment, asking personal questions to draw a map of my boundaries. Classic manipulation tactics. Textbook even, which sounds insulting to say about your own life, but that's what it was. I thought about calling my parents and giving them the real story, finally just saying it how it happened without trying to protect anyone's feelings, and I almost did, thumb hovering over my mom's name, but I didn't. What would it change right then? The team had already cut him loose. If anyone needed to hear something, it was whoever was handling the complaint. And I didn't have dates or files or anything beyond my account. I told my teammate if anyone asked for corroboration they could pass along my number, but no one called. I went back to class. It felt strange to do normal things while the ground under an old piece of your life shifts, but that's adulthood, I guess. Sometimes I wonder how many other athletes went through similar experiences before someone finally reported him, and how many didn't even realize what it was until they were older. The trust I had in authority figures definitely eroded after that. Not in a dramatic way, just in a steady, practical way where I double-check people's incentives before I agree to anything. What messes with me now is how normalized it all felt at the time, 'cause extra training and video review and dinner with the coach are baked into sports culture and none of it sounded obviously wrong by itself. It was the accumulation, the pattern I couldn't name at 18, legally an adult but still kinda naive about how manipulation works, and he knew exactly what he was doing. testing boundaries in small increments to see what he could get away with. And I got lucky that my discomfort won out before things escalated. Lucky that I had a family to go home to, and a group practice to hide inside. And yeah, I heard through the grapevine years later that some parents tried to press charges, but nothing stuck, because there wasn't concrete evidence, no clear video or confession or whatever prosecutors need. And last I checked, he'd moved to another state, probably coaching somewhere else now under some new program name, which is the part that keeps me up. Like I picture a kid sitting on that same couch, watching a movie about a famous runner, answering personal questions he doesn't know how to shut down. And I'm in my 30s now, and I still think about how easy it is to be polite when you should be loud. How simple it feels to explain away the wrongness as awkwardness. And how trust comes hard these days, especially with people in positions of power over young athletes. It happened when I was 19 and sharing an apartment with 2 roommates near campus. They both left Friday morning for a wedding out of state, and I stayed behind because I had to work Saturday. I spent Friday night watching TV and went to bed around 11. Our apartment was on the first floor of an old converted house, and my bedroom window faced a narrow side alley. I woke up to someone knocking on that window. Not tapping, knocking, hard and persistent. Through the semi-transparent curtain, I could see a person's silhouette backlit by the streetlight. A man's voice called out asking for someone named Samantha. We didn't know any Samantha. I stayed very still because this felt wrong right away. Like who knocks on a bedroom window instead of the door? And the voice wasn't slurring, it was steady. I stared at the lock on my window, a cheap latch that came with the place, and pictured it failing. The knock came again, same rhythm. He said, like he was talking to the glass, "Samantha? You in there?" I whispered her name once to myself just to hear it. Nothing about it fit. We had upstairs neighbors, 2 girls who hosted trivia nights, and the couple across the hall always argued about the thermostat. No Samantha, no mix-up that made sense. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand our layout. Tiny living room at the front, short hallway, bathroom in the middle, my room off the hall, kitchen at the back with a door to the shared yard. 2 locks on the front because the old knob was finicky, and a metal dowel we kept for the back slider when we remembered. I was trying to remember. The man knocked a 3rd time, louder, and said he could see the light and knew someone was home. Then he said he forgot his keys and needed her to open the door. I stayed frozen in bed, not answering. The knocking came again, louder this time. The voice said he could see the light was on. He knew someone was home. I slowly reached for my phone on the nightstand, trying not to make noise. He knocked a 3rd time and now sounded irritated. He called the name Samantha again, saying he forgot his keys and needed her to open the door. I dialed 911 and whispered to the dispatcher what was happening. The man outside went quiet for a moment. Then I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel in the alley, moving away from my window. I thought maybe he'd given up and left. The dispatcher's voice stayed calm, asked for my address twice to confirm, asked if I could get somewhere safe, told me not to approach any doors. I kept my voice low, told her I was alone and that I hadn't answered him. It got quiet enough that I could hear the fridge kick on. Then, from the front room, the handle turned. Just a careful test, then a sharper jiggle like he was feeling the deadbolt. I whispered, "He's at the front door now." And she told me officers were en route and to stay on the line. He rattled it once, then stopped. I held my breath, counting in my head. Then I heard the front door handle being tried. Someone was turning it, testing if it was locked. Thank God I'd locked it. But then I remembered. The back door in the kitchen that led to the shared yard. I'd opened it earlier to let in fresh air and forgot to lock it. I jumped out of bed and ran toward the kitchen to lock it, but stopped in the hallway. Through the kitchen window, I saw a shadow. Someone was standing right outside the back door. I could see the outline of a person through the frosted glass. I backed away slowly and locked myself in the bathroom, the only room without windows. Sitting on the bathroom floor, I kept whispering updates to the 911 dispatcher, saying I could still see the shadow at the back door and that I hadn't made any noise besides talking to her. And she kept me focused with short questions like, "Can you barricade? Can you stay put? Are you alone?" I heard sirens a few minutes later, not close, and then suddenly close, and the sounds outside stopped like someone froze. A man's voice called, "Police," from the front, a knock that sounded official, and the dispatcher told me to stay where I was until they verified. They announced again, used my name after the dispatcher relayed it, and she finally said, "Okay, that's them. Answer." Two officers moved through the apartment fast, flashlights low on the floors and up around the frames, and one said, "Back door's compromised." The kitchen door was slightly ajar. The security chain had caught and was pulled tight, the bracket a little bent like someone leaned their weight into it. The knob had fresh scuffs, and the thin frosted glass showed a dull smear where an arm had rested. I told them I might have left it unlocked earlier, and the officer nodded once and said that's why the chain was a good call. It bought time. He asked if anyone else had a key. I said no, my roommates were out of state. They walked the yard with their lights, and there were fresh shoe prints in the dirt outside both my bedroom window and the back door. Clear treads with a worn patch on the outer edge, like the person dragged one foot a little. One officer took photos and used his pen for scale, and the other asked me to repeat everything: the names, the knocks, the order, whether he sounded drunk. I told him the voice was steady, and he kept calling Samantha like he had a script, and when I went quiet, he moved. First the front handle, then the back. They checked the windows from the outside and showed me where the gravel was scuffed like someone pivoted. They checked the upstairs unit and the back gate while I stayed in the hallway with the dispatcher still on speaker. And a few minutes later, the officers said the yard latch was fine. No pry marks, no one hiding, nobody on the street. One of them pointed to the way the gravel was disturbed under the window and said it looked like the person had been standing there a while. The other cleared me to step out and asked if we knew any Samantha or a Mike. I said no to both and gave them my roommate's name so they could confirm later. The next day, our landlord came by after I left him a voicemail, and he stood in the kitchen staring at the bent chain like it was personally insulting. He said, "We'll replace the chain and the strike plate," and he brought longer screws so the frame wouldn't tear out so easy. Neighbors came out when the squad car returned to ask around, and the upstairs girls told the officers nobody named Samantha lived in our building. The couple across the hall said the same, and nobody knew a Mike either. The officers said it might have been a burglar using a tactic to see if anyone was home, the fake name and key story, and they handed me a case number and told me to call if anything else happened. They suggested a motion light for the yard and to keep the curtains fully closed. That night I slept on the couch with every light on, not because lights help, but because it made it easier to see the locks. I wedged a chair under the back knob even though the chain was new, and I set a metal mixing bowl on top so I'd hear it crash if the door moved, my dad's dumb bell alarm trick. Nothing happened. Still, every little pop made me sit up, and when my roommates got back Sunday, I walked them through everything start to finish and showed them the prints that hadn't blown away yet. But I don't think it was just a burglar. Burglars want empty houses, not occupied ones. And this person knew someone was inside and tried anyway. He tried the front, then waited, then went straight to the back after acting like he belonged at my window, calling a fake name in that steady voice like he had a right to be let in. What would have happened if I'd opened that window even an inch? What would have happened if I'd believed the story about forgotten keys? What would have happened if I hadn't locked the front door? I moved out 2 months later, couldn't sleep in that room anymore. Every time I heard a noise outside, I'd bolt upright and wait for that knock. 8 years later, I still triple-check every lock before bed. During my senior year at an art school, I used to stay after classes to work on my projects. We had this basic system where if you were going to stay late, you had to stop by the front office window and tell the administrator so they could jot your name on a clipboard. Nothing fancy, but they kept track of who was in the building after hours. That day, I wasn't even planning on staying. The bus picked us up at 3:15 and I was already mentally done. But when I got to my locker, I realized I'd left the stupid key at home. My jacket was in there, plus my lunch money and my bus card. Yeah, I know. Dumb. I wasted a couple minutes trying the usual tricks, tugging the latch, tapping the lock like somehow it'd take pity on me. Then I jogged outside anyway, just in case. But the bus was already turning out of the loop. I went back in. It was like 3:25 and the halls were thinning fast. Just a few kids clacking past in dance shoes and the janitor pushing a bin. I called my mom from the stairwell and she said she had an important meeting and could come as early as possible but not before 6. I said, okay, fine. I'll find somewhere to sit. I figured the library would be best, because at least there were chairs and outlets. But when I walked in, the librarian was rolling a cart toward the door with her purse on it, and she said, "Sorry, Monday's a short day. I close at 4. You'll have to head out." I asked if I could just stay one corner until my ride, and she did that sympathetic face and still said no. Rules. I drifted the hall for a minute. A couple art kids I knew were carrying portfolios to an after-school critique, and a ceramics kid brushed past smelling like clay. But by 4, I didn't see anyone else. I ended up in the art wing without thinking. It gets super quiet there when classes are done. Doors all heavy with those little wired glass windows. I sat on a windowsill where my cell had 2 bars and scrolled. Nothing important, just doom scrolling to kill time. And honestly, I was more annoyed than anything else because my jacket was in the locker, and it was getting colder in the building for no reason. Old vents. Around 4:30, the loudspeaker cracked on with this burst of static, which made me flinch. Then a voice, our VP, flat and clipped, said, "Lockdown is being declared. Everyone take shelter immediately. This is not a drill." The words didn't even sound real. I sat there like, wait, what am I supposed to do? 'Cause the corridor was empty and I wasn't in a classroom. I hopped off the sill and grabbed the nearest handle. Locked. Next door. Locked. I tried the one across the hall, rattled it, nothing. My brain did that strobe thing, like I was thinking too fast to land on anything, and I kept glancing toward both ends of the hallway like someone would appear with directions. Nothing. Another announcement didn't come. Just the building hum. I started moving fast, not running yet, checking doors as I went. Printmaking, dark room, senior studio, all dead-bolted. My phone had 1 bar now, and I texted my mom lockdown and hit send, not even sure it went through. The art wing has that long T-shaped corridor, so I cut left, tried 2 more doors, same story, and by then my stomach dropped because the place felt too quiet. I told myself it was probably some neighborhood thing, like the cops called it in, but that didn't tell me where to hide. Now, before I explain the next part, you should know our classrooms all have these inner storage closets, but they lock from the outside, and I wasn't trying to get myself stuck in a cabinet. I kept going. One door actually gave when I pulled. It was the big drawing studio, the one with a dozen easels and those tall metal shelves with student canvases slotted in. I slipped inside and eased the door shut, pressing the latch to make sure it caught without slamming. The windows were large, but the blinds were down. That helped. And the emergency light over the sink glowed a dull little rectangle. I dropped to a crouch behind the shelf loaded with canvases. You could wedge yourself between the bottom shelf and the wall if you turned sideways, and I held my phone to stop it buzzing or lighting up. I could hear my own breath, which was stupid loud, so I tried breathing shallow, mouth closed, which just made my chest tight. For maybe 5 minutes it was nothing. The kind of nothing where you start wondering if you imagined the announcement, and you're just gonna sit until the custodian yells at you to go home. Then there was a sound in the corridor. At first I thought footsteps, but it wasn't. It was more like a slow drag or scraping, metal on tile, and it moved, paused, moved again. A sharp bang came after, like someone hit a locker door with something heavy. Another bang, closer. I pictured someone going down the line, trying handles, maybe hitting the metal to see if anyone jumped, which is the kind of thought you hate having but you can't stop. I checked for another exit. Some rooms have connecting doors, but this one didn't. Just the one door, and the windows I wasn't touching. The scraping passed the room and my shoulders eased, and then the door handle clicked. I don't know if they were checking every door or if they'd seen the light from the emergency sign under the threshold, but the latch depressed and the door edged inward. I flattened myself against the shelf and kept my hands off anything that could slide or clatter. The door closed softly behind whoever it was. I heard breathing, like steady, not winded, and slow, deliberate steps, one at a time. The person moved between the easels. I pressed against the wall behind the shelf, trying not to breathe. The footsteps stopped on the other side. I was sure I was about to be found. A loud voice rang out in the corridor. "Police, come out with your hands up." The person in the studio cursed, bumped an easel, and rushed to the door. He ran out. I heard shouting, quick commands, a scuffle on tile, a hard thud, then quiet. I stayed put. My phone buzzed and I killed the screen. I counted slow, lost it, started again. Keys rattled. The door hinges clicked like someone brushed them, and I pressed my shoulder into the cinder block. After about 10 minutes, a flashlight swept the canvases, and a man's voice said, "Police. Anyone in here?" I said yes, and stood with my hands up. The officer wore a vest and had a name patch. He asked if I was hurt, and if I'd seen the suspect. I said no, and told him the guy ran when the announcement came. He nodded, told me to follow, and said not to touch anything. The corridor looked wrong. 2 locker doors were bent outward. Screws and a padlock lay in a line. A rolling chair was flipped by the lab door. Another officer met us at the T and said, "He's detained by the stairwell." My escort turned me away. They brought me to the front office where the administrator kept the after-hours clipboard. She had it open, phone to her shoulder. She slid a cup of water toward me I didn't drink. They took my name, grade, what room I'd sheltered in, what I'd heard. The officer asked who could pick me up. I gave my mom's number. He called and told her I was safe in the office. Now, before I explain the next part, you have to know our school is small and rumors stick. The officer came back from a radio call and said they'd ID'd him as a former student expelled last year after threatening a teacher during critique. He'd forced a back door, smashed a computer room window near the latch, and was trying to steal equipment from the IT lab and damage property. He tried to run when they announced. When they walked me out, I passed the IT room. The pane was spidered and punched through, and glass grit crunched under the officer's boot. Down the art wing, 3 lockers were caved in like they'd been tested with a bar. The custodian stood with thick gloves and a dustpan, but waited for photos. Outside, red and blue lights washed the doors. An unmarked car idled at the curb. My phone buzzed with a missed call from Mom and a text from a friend. I said I was with the police and they'd call her. Mom came early and picked me up. The office called and she left the meeting. And in the car, I kept replaying when he stood on the other side of the shelf, his breathing steady enough that I could almost feel it. And if the police hadn't hit the hallway, then he would have rounded the shelf, and I would have been stuck. And afterward, the school did what schools do. New cameras, a better back door lock, stricter sign out. And for weeks, I couldn't shake that it was luck, because that shelf wasn't a good hiding place, and the gaps between the canvases showed my cheek and the edge of my shoe. And sometimes I wonder if he paused because he saw me, the way those steps stopped like he was listening.